Mr. Fenwick, this neighborhood does not belong to you just because you paid for the house. Marjorie Crowley delivered the line at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning, while the sprinkler heads along Sable Fern Court hissed through the grass and the first heat of June lifted the smell of damp soil from the curb. Calvin Fenwick stood beside the narrow flower bed his late wife had planted, one hand resting on a garden trowel, his dark jacket unzipped over a gray shirt despite the warming air. At the end of the cul-de-sac, an HOA golf cart hummed softly beneath the rustle of maple leaves, its amber inspection light blinking as though someone had mistaken suburban landscaping for an emergency. Calvin said nothing. Marjorie stepped off the sidewalk in cream-colored heels that clicked against the driveway and sank slightly where the concrete met the lawn. Her teal blazer was perfectly pressed. A gold HOA badge hung from a lanyard at her chest, and a leather-wrapped clipboard rested under one arm, while she photographed Calvin's garage door, side gate, hose connection, and exterior electrical outlet. The faint chlorine smell from the community pool drifted between the houses as she crossed another 6 feet onto his property without asking. She kept moving. "Community Presentation Compliance Review," she said, as if the phrase itself granted permission. She opened a metal tape measure, drew it from the garage threshold to the driveway seam, and recorded the number in a form divided into color-coded sections labeled visibility, commercial appearance, and neighborhood risk. Calvin noticed that the bottom of the page listed a $143.27 on-site presentation verification charge, followed by a $38.91 supplemental measurement processing fee if a homeowner interrupted the inspection. That was new. He looked toward the golf cart and saw a stack of red door tags in the passenger tray, each printed with the Bellwether Oaks crest and a warning that unresolved findings could be converted into recurring assessments. Marjorie followed his gaze and smiled with the patient expression of someone who believed procedure and authority were the same thing. "We are protecting property values," she said. Calvin's own property was quiet, clean, and almost severe in its order. No vehicle in the driveway, no tools left outside, no trash bin visible, and no decoration beyond the flowers beside the porch. A dry leaf scraped across the concrete, turned once in the breeze, and caught beneath Marjorie's heel while she leaned toward the narrow gap beside the gate. She raised her phone and aimed the camera through it. Calvin finally spoke. "Are you documenting the interior side of my fence?" Marjorie lowered the phone by an inch, but did not step back, and the air between them seemed to tighten around the soft ticking of the sprinkler timer near the garage. She explained that anything visible from a reasonable compliance angle could be reviewed under the association's broad exterior harmony powers, though she did not identify the bylaw section. Then she wrote another note. Calvin glanced at the phone in her hand, at the angle of the morning light on its camera lenses, and at the digital clock glowing through the windshield of the golf cart. He did not demand that she leave, did not reach for the clipboard, and did not tell her that the rule she had quoted did not say what she claimed. He simply memorized the time. Marjorie snapped one final photograph and stepped backward toward the sidewalk, gravel crunching under the thin heel of her shoe. "You will receive the inspection findings in writing," she said, with the satisfaction of someone ending a conversation she believed she had won. Calvin brushed the soil from his fingers and met her eyes without raising his voice. "Please keep the original files." The certified letter arrived 2 days later, a green return receipt form attached to the back of a Bellwether Oaks envelope thick enough to feel official before Calvin opened it. Outside, heat shimmered above the blacktop. A lawn cruise blower whined 3 houses down, and the sharp smell of hot asphalt drifted through his screened porch. His phone chimed at the same moment with a cold portal notification marked Final Evidence Package, though no earlier evidence package had ever been sent. The timing was deliberate. Calvin carried both notices to the kitchen table, where morning light fell across the polished wood and exposed every crease in Marjorie Crowley's paperwork. The first page accused him of unauthorized commercial equipment staging and exterior home business activity on 4 separate nights, each entry signed by a different volunteer inspector. Beneath the accusation, 4 color photographs showed a pressure washing cart, orange cones, sealed equipment cases, and a heavy extension cord arranged in front of his garage. None of it had been there. The dates were June 3rd at 10:18 p.m., June 5th at 9:42 p.m., June 8th at 11:06 p.m., and June 10th at 8:57 p.m. Each image had been reduced to fit inside the same PDF, with a timestamp printed in a white box below rather than embedded visibly in the scene. The descriptions claimed repeated nighttime activity, blocked sight lines, and a commercial appearance visible from the common roadway. It sounded complete. The assessment table was even more precise. For unauthorized commercial staging assessments at $927.46 each, a $1,846.57 repeat exterior business presumption penalty, a $384.19 after-hours evidence handling fee, and a $477.23 neighborhood presentation risk administration charge. The total, $6,417.83, appeared in bold beside a warning that unpaid balances could be forwarded for civil collection review. A red card had also been hung on his front doorknob, its plastic edge tapping lightly against the glass whenever the air conditioning unit cycled. They wanted the house to speak for them. Calvin enlarged the first photograph on his laptop and studied the boundary between the pressure washing cart and the driveway. The cart's metal frame carried a fine grain of image noise that did not match the smoother concrete behind it, while the orange cone cast a shadow toward the garage, even though the porch column cast one toward the street. In the third image, the extension cord crossed a seam in the driveway, but its edge remained unnaturally sharp where the concrete texture should have softened it. Small mistakes. He checked the visible siding, the garage trim, and the reflection in the lower window panel, then compared them with photographs he had taken while repairing a weather seal the previous month. The house was his, but the light was wrong. Calvin opened the Portal download folder and found only one compressed PDF named BF_4471_final.pdf. There were no original JPEG or HEIC files, no device information, no capture records, and no individual file name for the 4 alleged inspections. The PDF properties showed it had been created at 9:16 that morning, less than 11 minutes before the Portal notification reached him. That proved little by itself. He drafted a reply without mentioning shadows, noise patterns, or editing artifacts. He requested the original image files in their native formats, the name of the photographer for each date, the make and serial identifier of each capture device, and the unaltered upload history from the association portal. He also asked the board to confirm whether any image had been cropped, enhanced, exported, or otherwise modified before being used to impose the assessments. Then he read the request twice. No accusation appeared anywhere. Calvin attached the PDF exactly as received, recorded its cryptographic hash in a plain text log, and saved a copy to an external drive kept in the locked cabinet beside his old technical manuals. Before closing the folder, he renamed it Preserve, Do Not Alter, and noted the delivery time. From a certified letter. Outside, the HOA golf cart rolled slowly past his house, its tires making a dry clicking sound over the gutter seam. Calvin never looked up. By noon, the portal had acknowledged Calvin's request with an automated reference number and a line stating that Bellwether Oaks reserved up to 15 business days to produce association records. The air outside had turned heavy, carrying the warm smell of pine mulch and faint chlorine from the pool beyond the clubhouse, while cicadas pulsed from the maple trees in uneven waves. A delivery truck rolled through Sable Fern Court, its brakes sighing near the curve before the neighborhood settled back into an almost staged quiet. Calvin used the silence. He mounted a compact camera beneath the porch eave, aimed only at his driveway, garage door, and the narrow strip of sidewalk directly in front of his property. The device recorded at full resolution, logged its internal clock settings, and wrote each clip to 2 destinations, a local storage card and an encrypted remote backup. He synchronized the timestamp against a network time source, photographed the setup screen with a separate camera, and recorded the serial number in a paper log. Nothing was left to memory. Inside, he created a case directory with separate folders for correspondence, portal exports, certified mail, original downloads, and working copies. He never opened the received PDF directly from the preservation folder again, instead duplicating it for examination and calculating a second hash to confirm the copy matched the original byte for byte. The method was old-fashioned in one respect. Every action had a date, a time, and a reason. That made it durable. His formal preservation notice went out by a certified mail that afternoon to Marjorie Crowley, the board secretary, property manager Martin Rowland, and the association's registered agent. It requested retention of native image files, mobile device upload records, access logs, revision histories, user session data, inspection assignments, email attachments, and any cloud sync copies related to the 4 alleged violations. Calvin also asked that no metadata be stripped, no files be renamed, and no portal entries be overwritten while the dispute remained active. The request was narrow. Marjorie answered before sunset from her HOA account, calling his language unnecessarily technical and confirming that the photographs were authentic, unaltered, and taken during 4 separate compliance inspections. Her email carried the confident stiffness of someone accustomed to turning an assertion into a conclusion simply by typing it beneath an official signature block. She added that multiple trained volunteers had documented the property and that all assessments would remain due during review. She committed herself. Calvin replied with 5 questions: the full name of each photographer, the native file name for each image, the make and model of each capture device, whether any photograph had been cropped or exported, and who approved the images for enforcement. Marjorie sent back a 2-page inspection roster listing 4 volunteers, each assigned to one of the dates, though the document footer showed it had been generated that same afternoon. The roster looked polished, with alternating gray rows, a bellwether oak's crest, and a revision code reading version 1.0. It was too clean. Calvin printed it, circled the creation date in pencil, and placed it beside the certified mail receipt. Then he extracted the highest resolution image available from the PDF and examined the compression grid around the orange cone, careful not to mistake the PDF's own recompression for evidence of editing. The block pattern shifted at the object's edge, while the driveway behind it retained a different quantization structure, a mismatch consistent with content introduced from another compressed source. He did not mark it as proof. Not yet. At 8:43 that evening, the HOA golf cart moved slowly past his home, its electric motor whining beneath the soft rattle of dry leaves in the gutter. Marjorie sat behind the wheel with her phone raised toward the house, the screen casting a pale square across her face. Calvin's new camera recorded the entire pass. He watched the clip once, verified the timestamp, and closed the file. "Let her keep going," he said to the empty room. The next notice appeared beneath Calvin's windshield wiper at 6:32 on Friday morning, sealed inside a clear plastic sleeve that clicked against the glass whenever the wind moved through the cul-de-sac. Overnight rain had left the pavement dark and reflective, and the air smelled of wet cedar, cold concrete, and faint wood smoke from a fireplace farther up Sable Fern Court. Across the street, sprinkler heads rose with a mechanical snap and sent thin streams hissing over a lawn already soaked from a storm. The pressure was changing. The notice added a $219.63 failure to cooperate with visual compliance verification assessment and a recurring $46.17 weekly administrative continuation charge, both effective immediately. A separate paragraph suspended Calvin's access to the clubhouse, pool, and reservation system until the disputed balance was paid, though he had not entered the clubhouse in nearly 3 years. At the bottom, bold text warned that the account was being prepared for civil collection review and possible recording as an association debt against the property. Marjorie wanted the word debt to do the work. Calvin photographed the sleeve exactly where he found it, first from a distance, then close enough to capture the staple placement, printed date, and faint toner streak along the left margin. He lifted the sleeve by its edges and placed it in a clean document folder, preserving its folds, staple placement, and condition exactly as received. Inside, he scanned both sides at 600 dots per inch and saved the images in a write-protected evidence folder. Routine made facts stronger. That afternoon, an email from Marjorie went to the entire board, describing Calvin as a resident engaged in systematic noncompliance and procedural obstruction. Nora Langford, the HOA treasurer, replied privately to ask whether the original photographs had been reviewed before the assessments were entered into the accounting system. Marjorie answered that visible proof did not require technical interpretation and instructed Nora to maintain the full balance without adjustment. The reply arrived 11 minutes later. Nora did not respond. At 9:07 that evening, the electric whine of the HOA golf cart returned, slower than before, accompanied by the crunch of its tires over loose gravel near Calvin's curb. Marjorie stopped beneath the maple tree, raised her phone toward the garage, and remained there for 43 seconds while dry leaves scraped across the gutter behind her. Calvin stayed inside with the lights low. His camera recorded an empty driveway, a closed garage, and Marjorie's inspection pass in continuous high-resolution video, preserving the scene before, during, and after the time she claimed to be observing commercial activity. Nothing changed. The following morning, Calvin opened the resident portal and found the full $6,683.63 balance already labeled delinquent, with no notation that his appeal remained pending. He captured the page, downloaded the account ledger, preserved the portal notification with its full headers, and recorded the page timestamp. The system had treated the accusation as final before any evidentiary hearing had occurred. Then he sent no complaint. At 4:18 p.m., Marjorie posted a notice announcing a public compliance hearing to address what she called his refusal to respect community standards. Calvin read the date, checked his calendar, and clicked accept. 3 days before the hearing, Martin Rowland released a package labeled Portal Evidence Export, but the archive contained converted JPEG files rather than the untouched camera originals Calvin had requested. The morning was cool enough for the windows to remain open, and the smell of cut grass mixed with coffee while a maintenance truck rattled over the clubhouse speed bump. Somewhere beyond the back fence, a pool pump started with a low mechanical thrum. The package was incomplete. Calvin copied the archive to a working drive, calculated its SHA 256 hash, and recorded the value beside the download timestamp and portal transaction number. He preserved the original archive, extracted a documented working copy, and generated a metadata report separating embedded EXIF fields, XMP editing history, and the new file system timestamps created during extraction. The 4 photographs carried different names, but their technical fingerprints were nearly identical. That was the first seam. Each file reported the same camera make, model, lens profile, and device serial identifier, undermining the claim that the photographs had arrived as independent volunteer submissions and raising the question of who controlled the device. Their color profiles matched byte for byte, their pixel dimensions followed the same export preset, and their embedded thumbnails have been regenerated by the same editing application. More important, the XMP history showed all 4 files were saved within a 27-minute window on June 11th. The first export had begun at 8:31 a.m. on June 11th, only 77 minutes after Marjorie photographed his driveway. None had been created on the nights listed in the violation notices. Calvin leaned closer. The metadata also contained a software agent string from a layered image editor and the same XMP original document ID across all 4 exports, strongly supporting the conclusion that they had descended from one working project rather than 4 independent camera captures. A source path fragment had survived the export process. Clubhouse _ images / pressure _ bid / selects. That was enough to ask the next question. He submitted a narrow records request for photographs attached to recent clubhouse maintenance proposals, including the vendor's site condition images and equipment documentation. Martin produced them the following afternoon, perhaps believing they were unrelated. In the third vendor photo, Calvin found the same pressure washing cart, the same chipped orange cone, and the same black equipment case with a crescent-shaped scrape near its latch. The extension cord had the identical pale tape repair near the plug. Same objects. Calvin created side-by-side enlargements and aligned the equipment using fixed damage marks rather than shape alone. The scrape, tape repair, wheel wear, and bent cone base matched in every comparison, while the different backgrounds were consistent with the objects having been isolated and placed over images of his driveway. He also mapped edge halos, inconsistent noise, and shadow directions, but labeled those findings supportive rather than conclusive. Precision mattered more than drama. Late that evening, Elena Vance reviewed his report during a quiet video call while rain tapped against the kitchen window and the scent of wet pavement entered through the screen. She recommended sending one more preservation demand, this time naming the editing histories, cloud sync project files, and portal audit logs specifically. Calvin agreed, but he did not attach his comparisons. "Give her room," Elena said. "She already has it," he replied. Marjorie answered the next morning with another official declaration that no photograph had been materially altered and that all files represented separate first-hand observations. Her signature appeared above the words President, Bellwether Oaks Residential Association. Calvin saved the message with its full headers. Then Martin's audit export arrived. Every image had been uploaded during one administrator session from Marjorie. Crowley's account. The audit log did not prove who had edited the images, but it proved who had assembled the enforcement record, and Calvin treated that distinction with care. He preserved the CSV audit export exactly as Martin had delivered it, calculated its hash, and generated a separate human-readable report showing the session start, upload times, account identifier, browser signature, and the sequence in which each photograph entered the portal. Outside, the afternoon sun heated the cedar fence until it released a dry resin smell, while the HOA golf cart's tires whispered across the pavement near the clubhouse. The pattern was exact. All 4 photographs had been uploaded within 9 minutes from Marjorie Crowley's administrator session, after the inspection roster claimed 4 different volunteers had already submitted separate reports. The portal recorded no earlier uploads, no transfers from volunteer accounts, and no independent review before the assessments were posted. One account controlled the chain. Nora Langford requested an emergency board call that evening, and the conference speaker in the clubhouse made every voice sound slightly metallic beneath the hum of fluorescent lights. She asked that the public hearing be postponed until an outside technician could verify the source files and determine whether the association had preserved the originals. Martin Rowland supported the delay, explaining that the administrator logs conflicted with the volunteer roster and that the exported JPGs were not native camera files. Marjorie refused. She said the board was allowing technical distractions to replace visible reality, and she directed Martin to display only the violation PDF at the hearing, not raw system logs that residents might misunderstand. Martin went quiet. The next morning, Calvin and Elena Vance sent a settlement proposal designed to give the board a clean exit before the meeting. It asked the HOA to withdraw the assessments, remove the delinquency notation, preserve all electronic records, and appoint an independent reviewer without admitting intentional misconduct. Calvin did not demand public humiliation, damages, or Marjorie's resignation. He offered containment. Marjorie rejected it in 37 minutes. Her response stated that the photographs were authentic, the dates were accurate, the images had not been materially altered, and each report represented a distinct inspection conducted by an assigned volunteer. She added that Calvin's willingness to settle confirmed he understood the strength of the association's case. The assumption was useful. Calvin saved the message in its native format, retained the full headers, and added each representation to a verification table beside the technical record that contradicted it. He marked the statements as claims rather than conclusions, then linked them to the corresponding metadata, portal events, and document creation times. By evening, his presentation contained only 12 slides. No animation, no acquiescence. The first slide displayed the 4 alleged inspection dates, the second displayed the actual file creation window, and the third mapped every upload to Marjorie's session. Later slides compared camera identifiers, XMP history, source path remnants, and matching damage marks on the clubhouse vendor equipment. Each point stood alone. At 7:26, Marjorie sent the formal hearing agenda to every homeowner in Bellwether Oaks. Calvin was allotted 5 minutes under a section titled Resident Explanation, while Marjorie reserved 25 minutes for evidence review and community standards enforcement. The email warned that disruptive conduct would result in removal from the meeting and a $118.44 procedural order restoration charge. Calvin printed the agenda once. Along Sable Fern Court, porch lights came on one by one as neighbors who rarely attended HOA meetings exchanged messages and planned to bring folding chairs because the clubhouse held only 36 seats. Several had old violation folders tucked beneath their arms. They remembered. Photographs, too. On the morning of the hearing, Nora called Calvin and quietly asked whether he intended to accuse Marjorie of fabricating evidence. Calvin watched a sprinkler sweep across the empty driveway, each pass catching the sunrise in a brief silver arc. "No," he said. "I'm going to ask the files what happened." By 6:40 that evening, every chair in the Bellwether Oaks clubhouse was occupied, and 12 more residents stood along the back wall beneath an air vent that rattled whenever the compressor started. The room smelled of floor polish, burnt coffee, and chlorine carried in from the pool through the side entrance, while folding chair legs scraped across the vinyl tile in short, nervous bursts. Marjorie Crowley stood beside the projector in a pale cream blazer, her gold HOA badge centered perfectly above a stack of tab binders. She looked prepared. The first photograph filled the screen at 7:03, showing Calvin's garage behind a pressure washing cart, 2 orange cones, and a black equipment case. Marjorie described it as evidence from the June 3rd inspection, then displayed the remaining images and repeated the claim that 4 trained volunteers had observed separate nighttime violations. Her voice remained smooth as she read the $6,683.63 outstanding balance from the portal. Numbers made it sound settled. When Calvin's 5 minutes began, he placed a slim laptop on the side table and asked Marjorie whether the photographs on the screen were the same files used to impose the assessments. She said yes, then confirmed that the listed dates were accurate. The images had not been materially altered, and each one represented a distinct inspection by an assigned volunteer. Nora Langford asked whether Marjorie understood that her answers would be entered into the meeting minutes. Marjorie adjusted her clipboard and said she did. The record closed around her. Calvin connected his laptop without opening the printed folder beside him. His first slide contained only 3 columns: reported inspection time, actual file creation time, and portal upload time. The 4 reported dates spanned June 3rd through June 10th, but the file record showed that all 4 JPGs had been exported on June 11th between 8:31 and 8:58 that morning, then uploaded during a single 9-minute administrator session. A murmur moved through the room. When the 5-minute timer sounded, Nora called for a motion to suspend the limit until the source of the association's evidence had been fully examined, and the board approved it without objection. Marjorie said exported copies could carry newer dates than original photographs, and Calvin agreed that they could. Then he advanced. The second slide displayed the camera make, model, lens profile, and serial identifier embedded in each file. Every value matched, even though the roster named 4 different volunteers and disclosed no shared inspection device. Marjorie said the volunteers might have used an HOA phone. Calvin asked Martin whether Bellwether Oaks owned an inspection phone. Martin said it did not. Silence followed. The third slide showed the XMP history, identical document identifiers, the same layered editing application, matching export settings, and a shared project lineage across all 4 files. Calvin explained that cropping alone would not account for the persistent project identifier, shared editing history, and common export lineage recorded across the files. He kept his voice level. Marjorie called the data overly technical and told the residents to focus on what the photographs visibly showed. Calvin advanced to 2 enlarged images placed side by side. On the left was the equipment in front of his garage. On the right was a vendor photograph taken beside the clubhouse, where the same pressure washing cart carried the same chipped frame, the same cone had the same bent base, and the same black case bore the same crescent-shaped scrape near its latch. The repaired section of extension cord matched too. The room changed. Calvin overlaid the damage marks one at a time, then displayed the source path fragment preserved in the metadata. Club for images / pressure interface bid / selects. Marjorie's hand tightened around the clipboard. That does not show who uploaded anything, she said. Calvin nodded and opened the final slide. The portal audit log appeared with Marjorie's unique administrator account, a browser and workstation signature matching her prior administrator sessions, and 4 consecutive upload events. Martin confirmed that every board officer had separate credentials. Each line carried the same name, Marjorie Crowley. No one spoke. The silence broke when Nora Langford asked Martin and Roland to confirm whether the audit log had been generated directly by the association's portal provider. Martin checked the export header, verified the tenant identifier, and stated that the entries came from a provider-maintained activity log that HOA administrators could review but could not edit through the association portal. The fluorescent lights buzzed above the board table. The projector fan pushed warm air into the crowded room, and someone near the back set down a paper cup hard enough to splash coffee across the lid. Marjorie lost the room. She tried to redirect the discussion toward Calvin's attitude, arguing that technical inconsistencies did not excuse a homeowner from cooperating with community standards. Nora interrupted and asked whether Marjorie had disclosed that all 4 images were uploaded from her own administrator session when the board approved the assessments. Marjorie said she had merely organized materials submitted by volunteers, but Martin pointed out that the portal contained no volunteer uploads, no forwarded attachments, and no earlier versions of the photographs. The system contained no trace of the volunteer submission path Marjorie had repeatedly described. Elena Vance rose from the second row with a narrow folder and requested that the board immediately suspend collection activity, preserve every related electronic record, and remove the delinquency status from Calvin's account pending an independent review. She specified the records in plain terms: native files, cloud backups, editing histories, email attachments, administrator logs, device records, and every prior violation package approved through the same workflow. Her tone remained civil, but each request carried a cost the board could now understand. This was no longer about $6,683.63. Elena also noted that the association had classified the balance as delinquent before giving Calvin a meaningful hearing, creating a procedural defect independent of the altered photographs. Nora called for an emergency recess, and the board moved into the small conference room behind the main hall while residents remained under the humming lights. Through the closed door came muted voices, the scrape of chairs, and once, Marjorie's sharper tone rising above the others before falling away. The room outside smelled increasingly of overheated projector plastic, cooling coffee, and rain-damp jackets. Nobody left. 23 minutes later, the board reconvened in open session, and Nora called a motion to suspend all enforcement against Calvin, revoke Marjorie's administrator credentials, freeze every open collection file based on photographic evidence, and commission an independent audit of prior cases. The motion passed 4-1, and Nora confirmed that the entire $6,683.63 balance, including every continuation charge, would be removed along with all delinquency notations. She then called a second motion. Invoking the officer removal clause in the association bylaws, the board voted 4-1 to remove Marjorie as president effective that night and barred her from accessing association systems, issuing compliance notices, or representing the board during the audit. Marjorie remained standing beside the projector, but without the badge and clipboard, she seemed suddenly misplaced in the room she had arranged around herself. A resident near the aisle opened an old violation folder and held up a photograph of patio furniture that had supposedly been taken from his yard after dark. Another woman produced a certified letter assessing her $312.49 for an alleged storage bin visibility issue, though the image showed a fence color that did not match her property. The pattern widened. Elena stated that Calvin would seek reimbursement for reasonable forensic and legal expenses, formal correction of his account history, and written notice to any third-party collection vendor that the debt had never been valid. Nora agreed to enter the terms into the minutes and begin settlement discussions. The next morning, no one raised their voice. When the meeting ended, Residents gathered around the board table rather than around Marjorie, asking Martin how to request native files from their own cases. She walked toward the side exit alone, her heels striking the tile with the same hard rhythm they had made on Calvin's driveway. Outside, the night air carried the cold mineral smell of pool water and wet grass. Calvin closed his laptop, verified the presentation files, hashed one final time, and slipped it into his bag. The evidence had finished speaking. By the following afternoon, Calvin's portal balance had been reset to 0, but the board's corrective action did not stop there. Elena Vance delivered a formal civil demand seeking withdrawal of every notice tied to the fabricated images, reimbursement of Calvin's forensic and legal expenses, correction of all internal account records, and written notice to the outside collection vendor that no valid debt had ever existed. The letter also demanded continued preservation of every existing source image, editing project, portal log, cloud backup, and related record, along with an independent review of every case Marjorie Crowley had supported with photographic evidence. This time, nobody called excessive. The audit began the next week in a small conference room at the clubhouse, where 2 independent examiners worked from read-only copies of the portal database and cloud storage records. 6 weeks later, their final report confirmed what Calvin had shown publicly. The 4 violation photographs had been exported from the same layered editing project, generated within a single 27-minute window, and uploaded from Marjorie's administrator session. The embedded source path led back to vendor images taken beside the clubhouse, while the repeated camera identifier, XMP history, matching compression artifacts, and shared project document ID established that the files were not independent camera originals and were incompatible with the 4 nighttime inspections described by the HOA. 1 metadata check had opened the door. The rest of the record closed it behind her. Bellwether Oaks approved a civil settlement that canceled the full $6,683.63 balance, reimbursed $4,912.38 in forensic and legal costs, and paid $2,175.64 in settlement consideration for the improper collection activity and false delinquency notation. The board also agreed to review 73 older enforcement files, suspend every case lacking native images, and return money to residents whose penalties could not be supported by verifiable evidence. Marjorie was required to acknowledge in writing that she no longer held authority as president or administrator, surrender every association record in her possession, and refrain from accessing the compliance portal. After coverage, counsel warned that intentional conduct outside authorized procedures might not be insured. Marjorie entered a separate written settlement requiring her to contribute personally toward the uncovered expenses. It was lawful, documented, and final. The sharpest consequence was not the money. It was the loss of control. Residents who once lowered their voices when Marjorie approached now asked for records in writing, requested native files, and demanded that every assessment identify the rule, the evidence source, and the person responsible for verification. The board adopted a new digital evidence policy requiring retention of native files, named photographers, upload logs, and documented review before any civil collection step. Cryptographic hashes would be generated whenever evidence was disputed or referred for civil collection or property-related enforcement. No cropped, enhanced, or converted image could replace the native file, and every modification had to be disclosed in the enforcement record. No anonymous inspection could trigger civil collection or any property-related enforcement step. No president could again turn a clipboard into unquestioned authority. Calvin declined the invitation to join the board. He returned to the house at the end of Sable Fern Court, where the driveway remained empty, the garage stayed closed, and the flower bed his wife had planted continued to bloom along the porch. One evening, Nora stopped by to thank him for forcing the association to change. Calvin looked toward the small camera beneath the eave, then at the quiet street beyond it. "Rules need evidence," he said. "Power needs limits." The sprinkler heads rose in the fading light. Leaves moved softly across the curb, and the neighborhood sounded ordinary again. That was the victory. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.